Okay, now that we've taken the phone all the way apart, we're going to, first before we do anything, we're going to reattach that screen, the earpiece screen, to the new screen and digitizer. It's not very easy. You just kind of stick it on there, and don't worry, once you put the phone, put it back together, it will stay in place, hopefully. Or you can use a little bit of little contact cement, just a tiny little drop on a corner just to kind of hold it in place. But there should be some stickiness left on it to be able to put it back on there and have it stick.
So in case you're wondering how I kept track of all the screws and everything, as you can see, as I performed each step along the way, I pulled them off because you have to keep all the screws separate because they're all different in every step. So each step, pulled them off, put a number, put the items down. Just give you an idea of how ridiculously small some of those screws are. Okay. The ones on that plate, really small. I'll give you scale. Put my finger down here. So, size of a gnat's ass. So yeah, this is how I kept track. Most people were saying, do something similar where you're keeping track when you put them off to the side, because you want to make sure that you don't lose track of what goes where, because you will have a difficult time getting it back together. So anyway, let's get back to the put together process.
So in this part of the process, you're going to work to make sure that the two cables for the motherboard on the digitizer and screen are fed through the frame through that slot right there. While doing this, you want to make sure that you're pretty much evenly attaching the screen to the frame. See those slots on the new glass that hang down, those little tabs? Those have to go through exact little slots on the frame. You don't want to force anything because you don't want anything to break. That would pretty much, make it a little bit impossible to work with your phone at that point. So you want to be careful, take your time, see how it fits, see how it goes together. You're going to want to make sure those ribbon cables are pulled all the way through that slot. If your ribbon cables get bent in between the frame and the digitizer, and you don't pull them all the way through that slot, you'll never be able to attach them to the motherboard once you get the motherboard back on. And then you've got to remove all those screws to get back to it to figure out what the problem is. So give it a tug, make sure it's coming through evenly. Right here is where I find that my glass is not going down flush to the frame, and I'll go ahead and skip forward to what the problem is there to kind of give you a heads up, so when you're doing this you'll know exactly what you need to look for.
Okay, so I noticed that the screen wasn't going on and I didn't want to force it, and I noticed that on this corner it wasn't going down all the way. So when I looked at it here, I see that this right here, see that right there, that's a piece of glass that came out of this right here. So it's actually a piece of glass from right there in the corner that because they glue it in certain spots, that stuck to the board, and when I was trying to put it on, I was noticing that it was giving me some resistance. So don't force it whatever you do, always check.
Okay, now that we have the screen and digitizer all the way through and attached to the frame, we'll go ahead and put the screws back in. We have the cables pulled through. I've made sure that there's none of the cable is trapped underneath between the frame and the digitizer. It's all been pulled through evenly. It is a little bit of a struggle. Take your time. Don't rush it. You will possibly break one of the attachment points or something else, so you don't want to rush it, but just make sure your cables are pulled all the way through, and then put all the screws back in, to the corners and to the sides, in order. After you get the final screw in, now you're going to give it a look around once around just to make sure that the glass sits evenly with the frame. You want to make sure there's no gaps or holes or anything. Make sure everything looks right, and check your cables. You'll find that one cable here, the inside cable, if you look on the inside of it where my left thumb is, you'll see two dashed lines, and those dashed lines are fold points where you need to kind of bend that cable on those dashes. I'll show this to you here so you can see those two dashed lines. That's where the motherboard, basically it's where that cable will bend around the motherboard. So if you pre-fold the cable on those two dashed lines, your motherboard will go in so much easier. So just want to probably take a look at that and do that before you try to put the motherboard in. So here we have the motherboard, and you're going to want to make sure that the motherboard, when you put it around these cables, you want to make sure that, well, first you want to move the three lower cables out of the way, the connectors. Just bend them down a little bit, and then bend the other ones up out of the way, and then your motherboard should slip right down into the same place that you pulled it out of. The holes will line up. The only thing you have to worry about is that little camera in the top corner up there, top left corner. And as you're putting the motherboard in, the camera will move around, so just be careful of that. You don't want to dislodge it or anything. And it should just pretty much snap right into place there. And then you want to just kind of test the ribbons real quick to see how they will fold down. And then you're going to want to start screwing the motherboard down and using the screws as you had them laid out over to the side. And you're just going to reattach it the same way you took it apart. Remember, when you put the center side screw into the motherboard, that if you had the water damage sticker on top of that screw, remember to put it back at this point. I did not have it there for whatever reason. I think it was in a different location, actually underneath the motherboard, but some of the phones it has it right on top of that screw, so that's where you would put it back at this time. Okay, at this point we're going to reinstall the speaker assembly, and remember that little nodule thing that sticks off there, lack of a better word, that's going to hook around the screw post at the base of the motherboard. So you want to make sure that you get it back in there just right. It's kind of hard to see in the video here, but trust me, it's got to go in there. Got to hook that side in first and then slip the speaker assembly in. Okay, once you get it pushed down in there, you're going to then screw the speaker assembly back in. And at this moment, it is now time to reattach the speaker connector. Now that one, remember, you had to be very careful when prying that up not to damage the post. And likewise, you want to be just as careful when you're pushing this back down on there. It's a little difficult to get on there. Use a flat tip screwdriver or tip of your finger if you have small enough fingers, which, you know, it's really difficult to do, but you can just pretty much work it on there and snap it right back on. Okay, after you have the speaker power cable reconnected to its post, you'll bend the ribbon cable back over and attach it to its slot. Now this could be a little tricky. It doesn't want to go readily. You have to kind of look at it and see how it actually fits together, and look at it from the side, and you can figure out how to get it actually into the slot perfectly. It just takes a little bit of work on it, but it's don't get discouraged. When it goes, it'll go in nice and flat and smooth, and you'll know it's connected. Okay, once you get the side ribbon cable back in place, move up to the motherboard cables, and those you'll just gently bend the second from the left or top in this view. Put that cable down first. It pretty much rocks in place the same as the side cable, and you'll get a pretty positive feel when it goes into place properly. Then you'll lay down the leftmost or topmost in this view, or leftmost in this view now. You'll put that on second. Just kind of rock it in there. It'll kind of, you can kind of see how it lines up, and then just push it down. And then once those are in place, go ahead and put down the next three. No particular order, just anyway, left to right, right to left, however you want to do it, just until they make sure they connect with the motherboard into those connectors. Next, we're going to reinstall the vibrating motor, and you'll put that back in. Now, we get focus there on it. Now it's hard to focus it. There you go. So that little lower section, just like that, just drop it back in there, line up the screw holes, and then go ahead and screw it back together. Next, we're going to reassemble the top plate. We're going to set it down in, so the lower side, which is facing down right now, Put that in first. You'll line up those holes and then match up the top hole. Now we're going to screw the top plate back on. Now remember that you had to keep the screws in an exact order because all the screws are different except for two. There's only two that match each other. All the others are a different type of screw. So you want to make sure you put them right back in the exact same hole so you don't strip out a hole or a screw or break something. Okay, now that we've replaced the last screw in the top plate, now we're going to put the side plate on, the one that covers the side ribbon cable connector. And you will just position that in place once you figure out which way it came off. There's a little bend on it that you'll figure out that it just goes over onto the side. So it makes it sit there nice and pretty. And then go ahead and screw it down into place. Alright, so next we're going to put the battery in. Go ahead and slip it on in. Basically just kind of push it back down a little bit. You don't have to push too hard, just enough to, re-adhere it to the glue. And then we got to remember to put that little wedge piece back in. Sorry, it's out of frame here. Get it back in frame in a second. Had the camera zoomed in, and we got to zoom it back out. So after you get the wedge put in, or the little elbow, whatever you want to call it, then you will push the battery connector over into place and then put the screw through the connector and the elbow. You have to line it up. It doesn't naturally want to go into place. That little elbow in there, that little wedge, if you will, whatever that thing is, a little elbow arm bracket thing, for lack of a better term. But just you can kind of position it by eye, and then just go ahead and screw it down. Okay, now that we have the battery in place, the next and final step, well, almost final step, is to put the back cover back on. And we'll just slip it into its little holes there, and then slide it back down. And now we want to put the screws in the bottom. And once we have that done, it's on to the last step. So the last step now is obviously reinsert the SIM card. Comes in this little tray, it just sits in there. It's only one way it can sit in there. And then you just simply put it back into the slot and pop it back in. That's it. Now your phone's back together. There's a piece of plastic that covers, a protective piece of plastic. I thought the screen got cracked somehow. I was pretty happy that it didn't. So go on ahead and pull that off and fire up the phone. Alright, we have our screen. Apple logo's there. And there's the wallpaper. So that's pretty much it. We'll test it out here. Okay, it's a little slow to respond. That wasn't working. It's just very slow to respond because of the fact that once you reinsert the SIM card, it takes a while to scan it and make sure that what it thinks is on there is on there. That's my understanding. So anyway, it looks like it's functioning. Games are working. It's a little lagging, but after about 5 minutes or so, it stopped doing this. Now, when it first booted up, because it was working so hard to scan the card and the system itself, just be aware that it does feel a little warm. To me, it was getting a little warm from it working so hard. But after about 5 minutes, it cooled right down, and it's been fine ever since. So just wanted you to be aware of that. Hopefully you've found this to be instructional and helpful. If you decide to do it for yourself, for $30, what can you do? I mean, it's a lot cheaper than buying a new phone. And who knows, maybe you could buy some broken one on eBay and get the repair kit for $30 off Amazon, and you're good to go. I'll put a link down below. Anything else, any other questions, comments, go ahead and post them, and I'll try to answer them as I can. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.